Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to share with you my own Fujifilm recipe. Now, if you've been a friend of the channel for a little while, you'll know that I've made an awful lot of Fuji content on here covering different recipes, and last week I made a video sharing 5 of the ones that I've been using. But behind the scenes, I've actually been working on my own recipe now for the best part of about 6 months. Now for me personally, a recipe needs to be super versatile, and I find this is where an awful lot of recipes out there fall apart. They're really good in certain conditions, but when the conditions don't match the recipe, they end up resulting in bad images. Now for me, because I'm a travel photographer, I need versatility. I need to be able to take good portraits, good landscapes, whether it's sunny or cloudy outside. So for this recipe, I've been purposely tweaking it to try and get that perfect balance of kind of practicality as well as a bit of a good uniform look. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you the recipe, and then we're going to go through each and every setting, and I'm going to describe why it is I've settled on the settings that I've chosen, which will hopefully enable you guys to be able to tweak the recipe to match your own preferences, and also maybe even help you make your own recipes going forward, as you'll know the reasons behind why I've chose what I have. So here's the bit that you're all actually here for then. Up on the screen now is my Fujifilm recipe. Now there is a chance that other recipes out there might have similar settings. There's a general kind of theme when it comes to recipes on what settings work, so there is a chance that other recipes out there might be very similar. If that is the case, that happens to be pure coincidence. I have worked on this recipe myself, but there is a chance that other recipes out there might be very close. So first up then, let's talk about the film simulation of choice for me, and that is Astia. If you have not been using Astia, then you have definitely been missing out. Now, according to the Fujifilm website, Astia delivers vibrant colours of extra saturation, but its contrast is a little softer, making this a good choice for fashion, interiors, and even portraits. I always think of it as a bit of a less extreme version of Velvia. If you really like the colours that Velvia offers, but they're just a little bit too extreme, then Astia is probably that good middle ground. Somewhere between Provia and Velvia lies Astia in the middle. Next up then, let's talk white balance, as white balance is definitely one of the biggest things that affects the look of these Fujifilm recipes. Now an awful lot of film emulation recipes out there will have a fixed white balance. They'll have a Kelvin value that is set in stone. Like a lot of portrait recipes out there look great in the daylight, but when it comes to kind of more cloudy days, an awful lot of these recipes start to fall apart. So coming into this, I knew that I wanted to have an auto white balance. That way I've got this versatility that I was talking about at the start. So it doesn't really matter what the conditions are, because the white balance will move with the scene. Now for me, I still wanted a warm tint to my image, so my offset was red 3, blue -3. For me personally, I feel like this adds the right amount of warmth without being too overpowering. If you find this a little bit too much, then make the offset a little bit closer to the center, so you might go say red 2, blue -2, or even red 1, blue -1 if you want something quite subtle. Next up then, we've got contrast, and for me 2 settings fall into this kind of contrast section. First up, we've got dynamic range. Now I've set the camera to DR200, which means you'll have a base ISO of 2 times your base. Now on most Fujifilm cameras, that'll mean you've now got an ISO of 320, which I personally don't think causes me too many problems, and if it does, on a camera like the X100V, you can always turn on the ND. The next part for me when it comes to contrast is the tone curve. Now what I've done here is on the highlights, I've dropped them to -1, which is taking the brightest part of the image and making it a little bit darker, and I've also done shadows -1 as well, and that's taking the dark part of the image and making it a little bit brighter. These 2 things kind of crush the image a little bit and make it look that little bit softer and a little bit like it's got less contrast. If you want a little bit more contrast in your image, this is the setting I would change back. Now the tone curve has a pretty dramatic effect, so just changing the values a little bit can make quite a big difference. If you put both settings back to 0, you'll end up with a far contrastier image, and if that's your preference, then go with that. Next up then is grain and noise reduction. Now for me, I'm not really trying to emulate a film stock here, so I've gone for small and weak. I like a little bit of grain in my image, but I don't like it to be too overpowering, and I still want it to look pretty digital. I've also gone with a noise reduction of 0. Now 0 doesn't mean no noise reduction. I think this option actually goes all the way down to -4. At 0, there is still going to be some noise reduction applied. If you want to have a little bit kind of more noise in your image, then obviously make this noise reduction lower. And if you want a stronger grain because you have a preference for that kind of grainy look, then change the settings accordingly. Next up then, let's talk color chrome. Now if you're not too sure what it does, I'll put an example up on the screen now of it on and off. Now what it's actually doing is producing deeper colors and a wider range of tones, and personally it is a setting that I really like the look of. It's actually split into 2 different sections. You've got color chrome and you've got color chrome effects blue. Now for color chrome, I've put it on strong as it is an effect I really like. It adds a little bit of saturation to your image and a bit more kind of dynamic when it comes to your colors. Now when it comes to the blue effects, it is doing exactly the same thing, but it's just targeting the color blue. Now generally, especially for travel photography, the blue part of your image is either going to be the sea or the sky. Now I have a bit of a dislike of a really deep blue sky. If you do want them kind of deep blue rich skies, then definitely turn this back on, maybe go for weak to begin with and up to strong if you really like the effect. But for me, I'd rather my skies were a little bit more kind of desaturated than what that effect offers. Next up then, the one that took me the longest to decide on is the clarity setting. Now I've gone with a clarity of +2. Now the big downside for having a clarity setting of +2 is your camera will slow down when taking images. It takes a little while to process and it can be quite annoying. If this really annoys you, switch it off and put it back to 0 and your camera will stop stalling. But I personally do think that having the clarity on +2 makes enough of a difference to the image that makes it worthwhile to deal with that little bit of a slowdown. So it's up to you what you go for here, but I do think +2 is worth it. Now color, I've gone with +2, which means it's going to add a little bit of saturation to a already quite saturated simulation of Astia. Now this is my preference and I think it brings out that little bit of extra warmth in the image and I really like how it looks. Now if you're somebody that's looking at these images and thinking maybe they're just a little bit too saturated, then dial this down. Now the color setting is actually surprisingly subtle, and because Astia is quite a saturated simulation, you may actually find dipping into the minus numbers here might be what suits your needs. So once you've got all that dialed in and saved in your settings, the last thing to mess around with is going to be the exposure compensation. Now for me personally, I end up setting this at +2/3 of a stop by default. Now the main reason for this is I find that Fuji cameras are actually really good at protecting the highlights in your image, which is really good if you're going to be editing the raw files because it means you've got nothing blown out. However, when it actually just comes to sharing images straight away, I personally find that all the images come out looking that little bit too dark. So that's why I dial in the +2/3 of a stop, and because we had that -1 on the highlights earlier, I feel like that's enough of a difference that it stops your image completely blowing out at the high end, and I end up finding it as a pretty happy medium. So there we have it then, that is my Fujifilm recipe. Hopefully by going through all of the settings, I've given you a little bit of an idea into why I've chose what I have, and if you want to tweak the recipe a little bit, hopefully it's enabled you with enough knowledge to be able to change the things to match your own requirements. Now if you do use this recipe and you post things over on Instagram, then please tag me in your images. I would love to see the things that you guys are creating. If you're interested in what other recipes I have programmed into my camera, then definitely check out the video I posted last week. I posted 5 recipes from other creators that I've been really been enjoying. If you've enjoyed this video though guys, please do not forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.